Before we get started, I want to make sure you check out Blood and Meat. It's a 2D platformer currently in development by Lost Relic Games that draws inspiration from a lot of my retro favorites. Take control of a crazy drunk Viking, craft mead, or battle Vikings, demons, and even the Norse gods. It's an innovative take on a classic style, so don't waste time. Show us what kind of Viking you can be. Blood and Meat, available to Wishlist now on the Steam store. Alright guys, so welcome to the Inexperienced Development Podcast. Today I have John from Lost Relic Games. How you doing?
Hello. Hey, Jacob.
So, so what I recently saw was that game dev delusion video you did. I thought, honestly, even though it was so cynical, I thought it was honestly amazing. It had amazing music. And it had a really good lesson about don't expect to get too rich, basically is what I got from it. Just do game dev because you love it. And if you get rich, isn't that an added bonus? So what about that? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Right. So it was an interesting video because for the most part, the vast majority of people understood where I'm coming from and they resonated with it because the vast majority of people who are making games are passionate about it, whether they've come from, gaming or whatever, they're passionate about it. But there is definitely a group that I've kind of run into that I guess are definitely in it for the wrong reasons, I suppose. And it's very, very clear just having, conversations with these people, you get a vibe that it's like, hey, you can replace game dev with anything else. It's just a product for them and an opportunity to make money because it's popular and, just like the gold rush situation where, put product X in and we'll try to make something of it. But let me just kind of think on it a bit because so it was a sensitive topic for some and a few people were kind of vocal about it, but I think for the most part people understood the message I was trying to get, and that was that try to approach it from a place of passion because the outcome, win or lose, is going to be rewarding, and I think that's an important way to try to live your life because you want to enjoy what you're doing, whatever vocation or job you pick to do with your life. It's such a big part of our lives, such a massive part of our day, what we choose to do with our time. So you want to sure as hell make sure you're passionate about it and you have some purpose in your work. And I think having purpose is very important.
Yeah, I think especially with like this new era of people like our generation, as opposed to like the previous generation, at least in America, the previous generation would be doing jobs that would give them pensions and give them retirement. But now with the age of the internet, it seems like you can really do anything that you really want to. So why waste your time doing something that you think will get you, like, if you don't have, like, literally with, especially, let's just use game development. There's so many people that have so much passion for game development that they're going to be creating better products than you. If you're trying to make like a million different Froggers or Flappy Birds or something just to sell it, no one's going to play those games because I feel like games have to have a little character of like whoever made it in them. You know what I'm saying? It's like a movie. You can watch like all these B movies or anything like that. No one wants to watch those. They want to see like the movies that people took time and took their passion and put it on the screen. It's the same. Games are just a movie, an interactive movie in a way. At that point, at least to me, I see it like that. And so, I don't know what kind of mindset were you in when you made that video? Like what happened to you that day? What happened to you that day that you were like, I gotta tell people?
No, yeah, there's I had a few conversations with people in that particular week because I went to a local game dev meetup, and it attracts a variety of different personalities and people who are, because game development and is such a broad area. You have your mobile. You have your mobile game development, which is very different to your kind of itch, which is then very different to your Steam. They are completely different cultures, essentially, both in developer mindset and also the consumer. So it's such a game dev is such a blanket kind of that covers so many different types. So I was at this game dev meetup, and I was being approached by different people who were kind of like showing me what they're working on and trying to sell me on different things. But but it just became apparent to me that there's definitely a portion of people that are I guess in some kind of delusion. I guess I use that word not as clickbait, although it sounded very dramatic in the title, but I accurately meant it as a delusion because, well, some people, let's be real, they do carry with them a particular delusion as to the. Yeah, I mean, I've got to be careful how I phrase it because like I don't want to stomp on anyone's dreams. That's not the idea. I mean, you have to dream big. I'm a firm believer in. So just to kind of look at it from a different perspective, just to I'm a firm believer in pursuing your passions and really reaching for the stars and fall on the moon and you're all good kind of a way of thinking. But I guess it just comes down to being in it for the right reasons. And if you're already kind of spending your money before you've even made the game, and you're like, oh, I've got this great idea, it's going to make me all this money, and it's just all about the money. I'm not sure that's the right way. And it's interesting because there's been this long-running debate as to whether games are art, but part of the definition of art is to approach something from a position of like organic crafting and not from a financial kind of, I mean, look, but with that said, sure, there is an art industry that has economic ties and there's a lot of money involved for sure. But if every artist was creating art to make a buck, then the art would look very different than it does. And we see that in the music industry. And what has happened, we've got all these pop musics that are following the same formula, and every song sounds the same because they know the proven formula that's going to create success. They've got scientific methods applied to different beats, and they can kind of predict, make accurate predictions like, well, this song will sound, do well because it has a particular kind of beat pattern that seems to resonate with people. And games, or at least a part of the games games industry has fallen into that, absolutely. When you see that with sequels and a lot of games is kind of just being replicas of other games with different skins, and you see that in AAA quite often, and there's so much money involved. But for the most part, at least in terms of the video, I wasn't referring to AAA or this kind of enterprise level games. Like at that point, if you've got a business and you've got a staff of 12, yeah, you're probably going to have investors and a higher chance of being able to predict a return. Like that's a given. But it was more so at individual developers or solo or the people in my audience which are very much like me or you, just on that path of kind of creating fun stuff and trying to establish something,
Right, and it's not that they may never get big. It's like all about the reasons that you're creating games. That's kind of what you're preaching. It's like, of course, everyone wants to have the game that hits. Everyone wants the next. But even those AAA ones started from somewhere unique. A lot of them, like Assassin's Creed and stuff, Grand Theft Auto, the original ones, like the ones that have sequels, they started somewhere with original passionate developers or something at some point, and then they kind of were like, okay, we have all our $150 million invested. We can't mess this up. Even Call of Duty was original at one point. You know what I'm saying? Like at some point, even now there's 1,000 of them. The first one was at least a little bit original. Medal of Honor and Call of Duty were kind of the same thing, but I don't know which one came first, chicken or the egg at that. I don't know. But I mean, even the AAA ones have their uniqueness, the artistic quality at the beginning. And even in some of the sequels, they can bring a little bit. So how important is uniqueness, like when you're creating a game? Like let's say you create a game and you don't want the same game, but how important is it to be unique, and how important is it to be similar to other games?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's definitely like different schools of thought about that. You could look at it from both ways. You could say, well, to be too unique is to be very risky in the market if you're looking to kind of have a sustainable business. But just to put it back, just to quickly make a point, because now I'm going to be talking about business, and then I've got a contradictory video, which some might say, well, you're talking about passion. Well, there's nothing wrong with making a business out of your passion. If you can pull that off in this lifetime, it's a very good move. If you can marry those two together, then you're doing life well, because you're going to be able to, but yeah. So with that said, to be too unique. And I've seen videos, people have kind of talked about this, like don't be too unique, and they made a pretty good argument, saying that, well, if you're too unique and you're kind of creating genres that don't even exist, then it's very hard to find an audience because they can't connect with it. They don't understand what they're even looking at. It's too out there. It's like being ahead of, but at the same time, that's where the true magic happens, and that's where real pioneers and innovators can make a name for themselves and stand out by forging new pathways and creating that which has not been done before. And these are obviously the outliers, and the Steve Jobs of the world kind of analogy. But you see that in game dev as well, where you get a lot of these really innovative game designers that they just push the limits, and they come up with, they can even forge new genres essentially, or if not forge new genres, then definitely take an existing genre and kind of push it to its limits a little bit and go to a bit of a peripheral direction. And that's how you get your when they start mixing genres like Metroidvania and this and that, and now you got these kind of rogue genres which are kind of rogue dash something dash. This is mixing several different things together. But so I guess I think there's a balance to be had. You want to kind of not be so unique that it's foreign to the audience, because in the end, like, sure, you want people to play your games, you want to sell games. This is ideally the objective. You can sure, as artistic as that is, and how pure to the soul that is, like, there is great satisfaction in having people play your game. Yeah, absolutely. So you kind of want to find that, but at the same time, I'm totally into kind of the idea of kind of pushing innovation a little bit and trying out new things and where they come up. Not to say I'm pushing any particular barriers myself, but I'm definitely keep my mind open to kind of new approaches and new ideas, and I'm definitely not going to kind of stifle that creativity for the sake of fitting some particular mold or box.
So you're working on a game currently, Blood and Mead, right? You're still working on it, or it's done?
No, still deep in development on that, and that's been an adventure.
So how would you consider that unique or similar to other games, right? So
for sure. So Blood and Mead is inspired by a lot of my childhood games. So I grew up in the 80s and early 90s. So I had the Nintendo, the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, and grew up on these kind of games. And so there's a whole host of games that kind of inspire my design methodology. Obviously the Marios, there's a but that's so it's a bit trite to say Mario, or even to reference Mario these days, like, oh, I'm inspired by Zelda or Mario, because they're like the grandfathers of all games. Like pretty much every game in the market is in some form or another has a design aspect which is kind of inspired by those. Miyamoto, what he crafted there were these kind of these design decisions that are universal even to 3D games, or it's kind of this playing this relationship with the player that you can kind of play with a single cube, and based on that placement, and there's a lot of thought that goes into it. So I'm really inspired by those kind of great designers from the retro era, and I kind of intentionally didn't go with the pixel art because I wanted to. Well, first of all, I'm not particularly good at pixel art, so you got to kind of go with what you know.
Me too. I've tried it. It's just so hectic. I feel like I'm one pixel out, and I hate the whole thing. I delete the whole thing.
Yeah, for sure. That's a skill, man. Like, and in the future, one day I've always kind of added it to this, like, learn pixel art, because I'm a firm believer that if you commit yourself to anything, you can learn it. I'm very I'm very, very confident in the learning process. Yeah,
definitely. I love learning as well. That's like that's honestly why, besides the fact that I love playing games, I felt like learning, once I started learning game development, I just couldn't stop. Like I just fell in love with like learning. There's so much more, so much this and this, and there's so much I still don't know. And I mean, I'm still new to it, but I'm sure there's still so much that changes for you as well. So you're like finding new things out all the time, right?
Yeah, it's never ending. You know, you become a lifetime student, and it's very humbling because you know, there's you never. Well, I'm also a firm believer that you should kind of be a lifetime student of anything, and you know, there's no shortage of old sayings and adages that, you know, say, you know, a wise man never stops learning, or a wise man is a student forever, kind of thing, and that's very true in game dev because or programming for that matter, because it encompasses so many different disciplines. You know, you got, you know, 3D, audio, sound, and music production, and art, game design, coding. And you don't have to obviously do all of these. You can definitely delegate and outsource, and it's probably a good thing to do. And in the future, I'll probably leverage this a bit more, you know, because when I started this.
Okay, so we had some technical difficulties, some computers messed up, but what we were talking about was basically you have to be able to delegate responsibility, or you don't have to, but if you're an indie developer, you either delegate it or you have to know. Basically, you have to start learning individual things, right? So you're gonna either become a jack of all trades or a master of none, right? That's what I was thinking of.
Right. Yeah, because indie dev specifically, you know, game dev is once again a broad term, where indie dev, which is kind of slowly getting phased out now as a concept, because, you know, if you go to the Nintendo store or something and you have a look at the shop, it's pretty much 90% indie games anyway, or, you know, games made by individuals or small teams. They're definitely not kind of AAA. You know, you have your AA and then your single A, and now
is there all those A's? Is there really all those A's? I didn't even know about that. All I knew was AAA.
No, I kind of, well, I just my personal way of referring to it. I think AA I've heard now. It's kind of like, well, AA is where you have maybe a small office, but you definitely don't have the millions of dollars of funding.
Right, like a successful Kickstarter campaign or something like that.
Right, and the game is probably going to look pretty good and polished, and, you know, 3D and all this stuff. But the game dev, there's so many different things to learn from, you know, the programming, and a lot of people come to game dev in the modern era through, you know, Unity, Godot, these kind of platforms, but they're fantastic, but they're not necessarily the best custodians for teaching or facilitating good like coding practices and good. There's no like necessarily a foundation there, and some people kind of get tangled up because the tools are very accessible and you can jump straight in, but then you feel like you're making progress, but then you hit these resistance points with the code. And where back in the old days, you'd start with the code first. You know, when I say old days, I'm not talking that old in my own reference point. I'm merely talking about the Flash days where you'd be coding in ActionScript 2 or 3 or 1 even. But you'd have to kind of get that down first if you wanted anything to happen, because even moving a ball or clicking, there was no physics. You would have to code all the physics yourself, essentially. So
it's just a bigger pain. What would you consider yourself better at? Development, like design, programming? Like what do you think you're best at?
Well, yeah. So by profession, during the day, I'm a programmer. I'm a game dev programmer. I get paid. That's my profession. However, I am definitely a game designer at heart. Sort of, but, you know, I'm kind of growing into different areas as well. I mean, when I started this journey at the very inception, I only learned to program so that I could make something of my art and make things move on screen. So it was just a means to an end, basically. It wasn't hey, I want to do programming. It was, no, I wanted to create interactive things on screen, and the only way to do that was to code. You know, so then I learned to code, and then many years later, I got fairly good at it, and then I got hired, and, you know, I learned in a commercial setting, which is very valuable, and, you know, the rest is history. So I guess I entered this adventure making shitty Flash art, and chop job Photoshop work, but over time kind of grew into more of an engineering focused mindset. Yeah.
And so now you're proficient, basically. So you drew everything in Blood and Mead, like you painted it yourself, basically. Not necessarily drew it, but with Photoshop or
look,
whatever.
it's a mix. Early on when this project started, man, this project has a hell of a history to it, and never again is what I'll say, because I've outgrown the project somewhat. And I'm not even sure. Like I mean, when I started this project, my life was very different. I was single. And now I have a wife and a kid, and things have changed a lot. And my kind of workload is demanding in terms of my day job and stuff. So yeah, it's turning into a bit of this thing where, you know, I kind of one of those lessons that I should have known. But at the same time, it's fun either way. And I'm not relying on it. You know what I mean? Like I have a job, I'm okay. Like I don't, it's not like, oh, I need this to be a thing for me to continue. Like if it goes well, then absolutely fantastic. And if it kind of like tanks, then well, on to the next. But the funny thing is, and I was chatting with a friend of mine and who's also a game dev, and we came across this funny thing. I turned to him and I said, you know what is the number one motivator for me to try to finish this project? The number one motivation point. And it's purely so I can start a new project.
So yeah,
I just want to move on to the next thing. And that for me is like, oh man, if I can clear my plate, because I've got as you can imagine, and most game designers or game developers have a whole list of ideas that they want to work through. And the list just keeps getting, game ideas that is, and the list keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger over time, to the point where you got to kind of lock yourself out of and say, no more ideas, like
especially if you have discipline to finish your games. That's crazy. So like that's a big thing, because most people, like myself included, I'm a prototype king. You know, I could do like a 5-day prototype, no problem, but when it comes down to like finishing it, I guess I lose that passion that I had before, and I feel like just move that means that the game is not meant to be, at least in my point. But I think there's a lot, like, you know, you always hear you have to finish your games. If you don't finish your games, you're not really doing anything. And I think there's a lot also to be learned at the end part of like actually making a game. I think the only game I finished was like a Flappy Donald Trump game, which is like just a Flappy Bird clone. I just made some art for it. So
you know, that's a start, you know. And like, man, you know, if you saw my first games that I used to make, they were atrocious, you know. And I'll probably make some videos in the future kind of sharing some of those games. And you know, I have a long way to go, and this is definitely not I want to move into better kind of 3D. And it's funnily enough, because this project has gone on for a few years now, but that's not to say it's been a full-time effort. It's been a casual, and there were times where I just, you know, did months of other stuff because I lost interest in that particular project, or I may have not completely lost interest, but productivity went down to a very low percentage of my total output, where I kind of redistributed my energy to other projects, you know. I mean, just last week, I built pretty much a whole 3D game in like a different style of game. I wanted to just do something different. I said, hey, here's a week, let's do something different. So I built pretty much this whole casual 3D puzzle game with a kind of dynamically generated map and stuff, just to try something different, and also just to see what I can do in a short space of time. And then after that, I went back to Blood and Mead, and it's amazing how little you can get done on a big project like that, especially when there's game design involved, platformers, a lot of decision making, constant, you know, should this enemy be here or here, and the implications of that in terms of the level flow, and you're constantly rearranging things, and you're sweeping through the levels over and over again, and going back to the early levels. And because what happens is, and I've spoken about this before on different videos, but what happens is, you're constantly growing and evolving during the design process of making any game. So the longer the project is, you're very highly likely to outgrow some of the early methodologies and processes used, where I'll go back to an earlier level which I designed, and I think the flow is all wrong. You know, there's too much clumping going on. It's claustrophobic for the player, or, you know, I'll realize, well, you know, it doesn't match very well with the next level. There's an issue here in terms of the contrast between back-to-back levels, kind of diversity of game design, I suppose, theme diversity and things like that. So yeah, you get caught in this kind of a loop of constantly trying to improve the older things, where if you have a short kind of project that you've said, well, I've got 3 months for this, it's going to be not more than so you working back from the timeline is not a bad way to go. So okay, I'm going to give myself 3 months. What can I build in 3 months, rather than just trying to build without a time frame in mind, because that can go on forever because you constantly find things to do. But it's very powerful to have a constraint in mind and saying, well, and then you kind of draft a design doc, or not necessarily official design doc, but you draft it out on paper, you make some kind of basic notes, whatever you want to do, and you make sure that fits that time window. And if it doesn't, you got to start cutting features out.
Right. I think it's hard to gauge. At least, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm new, but I feel like it's hard for me to gauge how much I can really do in 3 months. Like, I know how much I can do in a week, but when I try to expand on that, like, it does, sometimes it slows down thinking about the design elements. For me, I have hard times thinking of like new ideas or how this should be, how that, just like you were saying, kind of, except I think in a little bit different, like new ideas and implementing ideas. I think it's hard to really gauge how long. Like, if I give myself 3 months, at 3 months it's not done, would you just scrap it, or you would keep going?
No,
right?
Of course not. No, for sure. But the idea is, I guess, to leverage these time windows to your benefit, because as humans, we tend to fill whatever time slot is allocated to us perfectly. You know, if someone says paint my fence, you have 1 year. You'll probably take a year, or maybe painting the fence is the right. Let's say building the house, painting the fences. That's a bit.
Well, but I mean, I get what you're saying. You put in as much effort as the time that you're kind of given.
Right. You adjust to it, and you kind of so anytime I have an opportunity to have a deadline, I jump on it, because I understand the power of those deadlines, and sometimes that means kind of signing up to some game festival, even though I don't necessarily have the intention of. It's not like that. Being in that festival is not really the intention. It's more so just, hey, let's use that date as a reason to get everything happening, you know. And one of the most productive weeks I had, or was it 2 weeks, on my game was I think it was last year, where I submitted to the Indiecade festival, and at that point the game was still a bit early, like it wasn't really there yet, but I was trying to kind of jump the gun a little bit. But it was very useful, because that 2 weeks leading up to festival deadline for the submission, man, did I put in a lot of work. I took time off my day job, and I just locked myself in a room for probably 2 weeks, just food, water, and dev, you know, and a lot of hand massaging and stuff. I got one of these for like when the with the
carpal tunnel, stave off the carpal tunnel.
Because, you know, you got to stay efficient. And in that 2 weeks leading up to that festival, I probably got months of comparative work done, you know. Because when we talk about these time slots, like, you know, 3 months or whatever, that's not necessarily full time. That's our casual time, you know, in between our daily obligations and whatever, and it's usually weekends. So when you try to build a game in 3 months, what you're saying is you're trying to build a game in a half a dozen weekends, basically.
Right. It's like 8 hours a week max or something. Like, you're not spending too much time, and maybe if you spend the whole Saturday or something, you can get yourself another 8 hours. But yeah, you're not spending it's not a 40-hour work, like, not something you would do as a job. I mean, I guess you could if you, but a lot of us have so many obligations, and especially if you're not bringing any money from it, it's
right. If you're financially independently wealthy or something, then you can absolutely do that. And I've seen that. There's a bunch of guys on Twitter from there's one guy is causing a lot of problems for people, I think, because from what I understand from people, he's independently wealthy from some alternate business, but he'll be like, hey, just work on your game all day, making all these tweets, and it's just like, well, I don't know, dude, you're kind of rich. People have to go to work.
Like, how can you? I mean, so what? I talked to Awesome Tuts. Have you seen that guy, Awesome Tuts, on YouTube at all?
No,
He basically does game dev tutorials, and he's making games now. Like, I guess he started his own company. He approaches this he has the passion, you could tell, but he also has like really business oriented mind. And so what it seems like he's lucky enough to have supporters and subscribers, but he started selling like game dev courses to support him enough to be able to go game dev full time. And on top of that, he's in like a country where it's the required income is not as much as like America or probably Australia as well. I'm not sure, but
Sure. Yeah.
so he's able to support himself on that with kind of like, and that again, that's thanks to the internet. And so a lot of people live in places like that where if you don't have to make just games, but you can do game adjacent stuff and you still learn. I feel like I learn a lot by making tutorials. How about like how do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like for sure. You know, making a YouTube channel is not necessarily so useful for promoting one's game. There is a bit of overlap, but for the most part, you're talking to other game devs, unless you have a particular channel that's, you know, for gamers. But it's very hard to build an audience for those without having a game first. You know, like the guys who made Hollow Knight or whatever, they have a channel where they just show their game and they have an audience, but the game came first. You know, then the channel kind of came, or maybe there was a bit of, you know, devlogs or whatever. But you know, I imagine the large bulk of success around that channel came post launch. You know. But for at least guys like myself and Awesome Tuts, you know, we building tutorials for the community, and so it's a bit different, you know. And but to answer your question, yeah, like I think making videos and tutorials has been one of the best learning experiences for me, because you're forced to kind of double check the knowledge before you do it. You have to kind of prepare yourself. You got to make sure that, you know, it doesn't always kind of land as you'd like, you know, depending on things. But, you know, I have a particular also approach that I'm trying to implement in terms of the style. I feel like a lot of people or a lot of channels are not really, you know, there's an issue of assumed knowledge, let's say. I think that's the best way to do it. I think Brackis did a fantastic job with this. Right, well, there's a lot of jargon or this kind of, you're expecting, because the problem is when you're proficient in something, it's hard to talk to people about what you do without using the jargon and advanced concepts. You know, you have to, there has to be a way to transcribe this information into a lesser form. So that beginners can kind of, oh, I see what you're doing. So talking about dependency injection and this and that and MVC design patterns. And, you know, it's like, well, you know, I made recently a video just as an example, just showing some basic stuff for beginners to consider in terms of centralizing code. And foolish me posted it to Reddit. And of course, all the elitists came back and came back, well, how you're teaching them all wrong. You should use an interface. You should, I mean, look, what are you talking about? No beginner needs to be thinking about that right now. That's the last thing. You know, everyone's an expert all of a sudden, you know, like everyone, but no one's willing to put in the hundreds of hours of giving free videos and stuff. Everyone just is suddenly an education expert on how to teach.
Well, that's Reddit as well. Like, I feel like if you post anything on Reddit, there's always going to be like the majority of people are experts on whatever you're posting, and they're just gonna. I feel like I feel maybe I've had one, not even game dev, one video like that went okay on Reddit. Other than that, like of my own videos, and they hate self promotion too. So like that, they get on me about like I'm not a fan of promoting on Reddit. If I were to promote anywhere, it's usually my personal Facebook. And sometimes I run an ad on YouTube on my videos just to, I mean, yeah, I like the buzz from Reddit, but at the same time, I just don't like the hate. I hate the hate.
Yeah, well, it's interesting enough because those people are the same people that you'll find in different communities, and they'll be nice. But I think the moment something lands on Reddit, it gets processed in a particular way. So it is what it is, you know. But it's funny. People are funny, you know. This is the human condition, you know, like. We move around the internet and there's different, yeah.
Sorry, my bad. It was about my dog.
That's all right.
We're good. Well, a lot of interruptions today. My bad. All right, that was a bad one. But okay.
You have a child running around too?
No, they're with my ex-wife. I don't know if I air all the
Uh-huh.
dirty laundry here right now, but
No, no. How are you finding how are you finding in terms of just balancing fatherhood with this game dev? I guess is a
so okay. So I'd say it's like a double-edged sword, right? So like, yes, I want my family to be whole, but also these days that I don't have my children is the days when I really get a lot done. So like I love so when I do have my children, I don't really get anything done. Game dev, YouTube, nothing. It's literally my kids. So that's a benefit to them in a way. But I mean, it's also, sad that they don't have a whole family. I mean,
yeah,
I don't know how to say this, but yeah.
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 No, there's a yeah there's a balance as well because
Yeah, no, you can, and from your side is the opposite, right? So you have to balance like the attention of your family like constantly, right? So now you have that. How's that with you?
well, especially as the YouTube channel has been kind of becoming more popular, suddenly I've got so many different things to attend to. So I've been forced to progressively over time adapt to being just very busy. Like what my baseline, I think subjectively, my baseline is very kind of busy, chaotic, but kind of works. Where I have my day job, then outside of that, then I have to manage the YouTube channel and come up with new ideas and film them. And some of these videos I've done sometimes can 2 weeks basically of time just to get a video out. If it's like a devlog or something like that, because I did a couple of these devlogs where I was out at the beach, I was over here, I was setting up tripods, and then you got to bring that all together and sort through all the footage, and you got to do the audio and make sure everything is working fine. And then you're like, wow, that was 2 weeks of my time. And then the video just doesn't get picked up by the YouTube algorithm. And you're like, oh, well. And then you make a video in half an hour and it's like, boom, viral. It's like, wow, okay. So that's how it works, is it? About some incentive, YouTube.
But I mean, it's also worth it. You're learning a lot. I mean, maybe at some point it'd be good to get an editor, because then he can literally waste his time going through all that, because it's literally hours you have to spend like going through hours of footage you're watching. You have to skip it, but I mean, it is worth it in the long run, because I feel like you're providing value to people. You're doing great. I think your channel's really it seems successful in my eyes. I mean.
Yeah, no, it's growing. It's been good. It's been growing a lot, and I'm very happy with that. And I'm very kind of humbled at the same time, because I realize I take my role seriously, because people are watching the videos. So I'm like, okay, well, there's a bit of a responsibility on my part, having a platform and doing good with it, I suppose. So yeah, there's a lot of meaning for me, I think, in the education aspect. And long term, I think that's definitely probably where I want to grow into. Beyond game dev, I'll always do the game dev, but there's no reason to just do that, because I'd definitely like to maybe do some courses and stuff, but with my particular flavor, teach with a particular methodology that I've been kind of cultivating, that I feel it works well.
Yeah, you have kind of like a Bob Ross style of teaching. It's pretty nice. It's calming. It's calming. It's good. It's definitely different from other people. Do you ever find yourself teaching things like that you're uncomfortable, like kind of you yourself are uncomfortable teaching, or you teach everything, only things that you're pretty sturdy on?
Well, I guess I mean, outside of my channel has a bit of a slight mix of content where it's some tutorials, but then it's also a bit of kind of advice and just general, I guess it's life advice even, but I intentionally try to frame it for game developers, because they are my audience and they are my community, they are my peers. But a lot of the stuff is, I guess, would apply to other business models and the different things in life. But the things I talk about typically come from my personal experience, and they are things that I've overcome and resistance points that I've run into and were big pain points for me. So I use those moments and how I overcame them, and I try to give people advice based on my past experience in these situations, because I've made all the mistakes. I look like I'm kind of have some answers, but I only have answers because of all the mistakes I've made. At least, answers relative to the mistakes I've made. So I think that's valuable, and a lot of people maybe don't consider that angle of, well, what did I do wrong, and how can I convey that to other people to kind of help. But here's the important thing, right? Just to kind of caveat that, you don't want to stop people making the mistakes, because the mistakes are critical in the learning process. And to not let people make some of those mistakes, it's kind of robbing them of the growth, in a sense. As strange as that might sound to some people, you need to know firsthand. Because someone tells you something like, don't do this, don't do that, you need to know why. You need to get burnt a bit by the fire. You need to feel the heat to understand why you shouldn't get too close or whatever. Like, these lessons without firsthand experience, they're kind of empty. And yeah,
I feel like I should put some of your music behind this, dude. This is some good stuff you got going up for real, though. It's true. You need to learn by people. Learn best when they make the mistakes, right? Like, it sticks, and then they'll know, okay, I can't do this, I can't do that. And coming from someone that's done it is definitely a good guide. I think it's really useful kind of retrospectively. So like, after they've made the mistake, then they can see how you've kind of made the same mistake and how you've reacted to it. I think that's where like the true growth could actually come in. I think you're providing a lot of value with that YouTube channel. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, man. It's pretty cool what you're doing with it.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. Hopefully, in the future, ideally, if I can transition out of doing kind of full-time commercial work, that's the ultimate goal. Is that I can work on my own terms and focus specifically on the things I want to do, and around these kind of things.
How big is the game studio that you work with?
They're large, but yeah, they're mainly. I think employee 80 people. I think.
Is it like remote, or you work in Australia? Like,
in office, but now obviously with the situation, everything's been pretty remote.
How do you find working on a team with other people, like other developers, and like kind of, because big, like especially 80 people, that sounds like a lot of people you can rub the wrong way.
Yeah, it's definitely and every place is different as well. The last few studios I've worked at kind of were more classic game studios, I suppose, and there's a lot of fun, a lot of Nerf guns and a lot of pranks and just a lot of stupid stuff. We had running around with VR headsets and stuff. It was good fun. Where this one is a bit more kind of corporate and a bit more serious in a sense. A lot of daily Zoom meetings with just walls of thumbnails and people staring at you. It's different. Yeah.
Do you have a VR headset? Have you used beyond?
Yeah. I've been interested in VR since the I think the DK one. I can pop it into frame here. Yeah, I got this one here. That's the Rift S. Look, I want to do some VR dev, and I started some VR dev projects and kind of parked it, as is the case.
I got the Oculus Quest 2, and then just like I basically set up a controller and then just had the ball shooting at me, and I haven't really tested it beyond that, because it's kind of like I guess I wasn't passionate. Like I am passionate. I love VR. I'm passionate about VR, but it's just so hard to make that transition from like a classical game to the VR game and then devote that much time, at least in my experience, in my 2 times I've tried it.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of thing, because how you design for it is so different, and also the development process is very, very different as well, where you're constantly in this state of putting the mask on and off, checking something, putting it on and off, and you're in development mode. You're in the Unity editor for the most part, so the frame rate is not as it should be, and what that means is you actually get pretty nauseous and during the development process, which is a huge factor. And a friend of mine who has been doing similar kind of experiments, he said the same thing. It's like he just can't do it because it's making him sick.
For me, it was,
and it's interesting.
what was it? With the Quest 2, I need a certain cable, otherwise I can't test it in the editor. So I was literally building it. Every single time I made a change, I would build the project, put it on my Quest, and so it was just and then I putting on the headset, and then having the non-optimized Dizzy game happen. So I definitely get where you're coming from. It's just kind of like a hassle as opposed to just click the play button, run around, shoot, or whatever you're doing, and then pause it.
But I do like it. I definitely it's interesting because it's just so innovative. But I also think I need to scale. I had some revelations in the past, I guess. I mean, the ongoing revelations, I suppose, but just in terms of my own approach, and I realized, hey man, like you got to start smaller. And I've always had this idea, but then you have to revise it even more. You have to say, well, I need to start even smaller than this. Like I had some VR idea. It was pretty rudimentary and it was cool, but I realized, well, that's maybe not your best first VR project. And sometimes you have to take a bit of an ego hit and release something that's, well, not release something, but finish something that may not be as sexy as you might want it to be, but it's practical and it serves the point of understanding the full process of building the tech and using it and designing for it and stuff like that. And then from there, using it as a stepping stone onto the next stuff. Because it's so, and no matter how many times people might kind of give advice on this, it's very easy for people to fall back into these habits themselves, where you put the cart before the horse, essentially, because you get overexcited about an idea. It's so exciting, you want to jump straight in. It's like, let me get into the all that meaty stuff, and you kind of realize, hey, maybe there's a bit of a journey here as well that I need to kind of go through before I get to this stuff.
Right, especially VR. VR is taking VR takes the, like, I feel like I spent probably 4 or 5 hours just trying to figure out how this Oculus integration thing worked with Unity. It took me so long. I'm so embarrassed to even say it, but it was just like so different to me.
Well, it was the same for me though. This is not unusual. It's the untold truth behind all developers, that behind the scenes, there's a lot of head scratching and a lot of like, what the hell is going on? Even in the studios I've worked at, and even at the highest senior level engineers, a lot of them are just kind of like stumped half the day, going, well, I don't know. This is there's this misconception that this. Right. Yeah. Sure. But you have the tools to critical thinking and whatever to kind of to wade through it and come to a solution. And that's the fun part of engineering and game design and game development. It's solving those problems, and that's I think for me why it's so addictive, why I'm so drawn to making games. To the point where I've almost exclusively swapped out my game playing with the game development as almost a pastime for me. It's recreational and fun. It's, if I get an open time to play a game, I'm like, yeah, I like the idea of playing games, probably more so than playing them these days. And when I do play, it's more often like I feel like it's for research, where I'm analyzing. Absolutely, yeah. But and that's not to say I never enjoy playing games. I recently just kind of like got Breath of the Wild for the first time and was playing that. I was like, yeah, cool. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's
definitely the best Zelda game. I like it because it's so new. I like new things. I know that people are like really into the retro. Like I like and everything, never changing things. But I like the climbing mechanics. I just think it's so interesting in Breath of the Wild how much they've changed and still managed to keep like the Zelda feel. It's not like Assassin's Creed 10 or Grand Theft Auto 7 or whatever the fuck is whatever is going on.
Well, that's Nintendo, that's why Nintendo is so popular. They don't have to be churning out a new game every year to stay relevant. They can, take their time, and I mean, the last Mario Kart, for instance, was they don't need a new Mario Kart for some time, because it's gonna you can have 4 years in between each one, and it's fine. You don't need to be. But yeah, I do. They're definitely good ones to look at in terms of a design approach.
So, do you feel more comfortable making 2D games than 3D games? It seems like, or is that just I'm just looking compared to Blood and Meat? I mean, do you make a lot of 3D games?
Oh yeah.
So Blood and Meat, for the most part, was my my entry-level project with Unity. So I've pretty much learnt all of Unity on this project, which is kind of a bad idea, but it is what it is. I mean, I did some, little demos and things like that, but in terms of making a full complete game, this is my first one with Unity. And as a result, there's a lot of mistakes early on that I'm now still cleaning up. It's like, I look at, because as I move through the project, I'll still find code and stuff that was legacy code that was written during that first phase, and the conventions are different. The style of coding is different. Yeah, so I'll try to actively clean it up as I come across it. But sometimes you're like, just sweep it under the rug. If it's holding together,
There's nothing worse than refactoring code, especially like mountains of it. It's just kind of like, it gets me going, dude.
Right, and as an indie, there's a balance there as well. In the end, you're trying to get games out for people to play. You're not trying to get into a mental fab loop about what the code looks like. There's a balance there, right? It should be. I mean, in a commercial setting, or when I work, I have code reviews. People review your code and they have to approve it, and this is a common thing. There's unit testing and these kind of situations. A lot of fun, not really, but so when it comes to your own projects, you want to almost rebel a little bit. Like, screw it, I'm just gonna
I'll put everything in the update method. I don't care. Or the dirtiest thing.
I'll globe you on singletons. I'll give you a singletons. But yeah, so it's a bit like that. But at the same time, there is a balance to be had, and you need to kind of structure things in a way that you can return to it and it makes sense to you. 6 months or a year later, because if you need to do an update for Steam or something, you want to be able to do that efficiently. You don't want to be going back into that code like, who wrote this? I don't understand any of this. Which happens, this, because we are constantly evolving, we are constantly growing and changing. The amount of times during my early years that I went from underscores to for private to not, and trying different conventions to like the M underscore, and just kind of you got to kind of feel out what works for you, because there's different conventions that you can adopt, and there's no hard rules. And quite often you'll look at some tutorial and you'll copy what they've done, and then you later on you watch another tutorial and you think, this guy probably knows better, so then you copy what he does.
And now like all your saved code is completely different. I do the underscores, but I'm just so lazy sometimes that it just ends up I just end up not doing it. And it's not hard. I feel like it's not hard to push shift and push that, but it's just like so annoying to me for some reason. But I mean, I see the value in it. I love to do it. I love the fact that it's there. It makes it so much more readable and let you see like what's private and what's not private, what's accessible. But it's just like, I end up just not, like a lot of times I just end up typing it. Like, it's a prototype anyway. I'm not going to release this.
Yeah, well, that's it. Yeah, and again, as we mentioned before, there's different types of developers within the sphere of game dev, because a lot of game devs come to game dev a bit like I did, from a place of kind of art and wanting to be creative, where then there are other developers who come from like a computer science graduate program, and they're all about the code and it being like all the principles and everything has to be there. But they're less interested in shipping games sometimes. They're more interested in the code. So I think there's a balance that has to be kind of found in between the two, where you're writing clean enough code that you can kind of work through it, but you're actually getting to an outcome. And I think quite often there's people on both of the extremes. And I mean, Derek Yu, who did Spelunky, that game. So, Spelunky. It's like one of his mega hits. I guess it's from the earlier days of indie games that kind of fall into that, around that time of the indie game movie and these kind of games. So I guess that early generation, but it was a huge success. And he wrote a book about how he made the game, or basically the story of him making that game. And he talks about how, he was never a good programmer, basically, and he just muddled through, basically, and how that's, typically fine, because in the end, we've now got a game that millions of people have been able to play and enjoy. And him not necessarily putting the right prefix or suffix on a variable didn't change that outcome, and that's the thing, because the gamer, the players don't care. The players don't care what design pattern you've implemented. They don't care how technically proficient your code is, or whatever technical accomplishments you might feel when you think about that code set. The gamers don't care. They want a fun experience, and quite often is if you focus too much on the coding principles, you get distracted from the game design, because there is a whole world of game design that you need to deal with when releasing a game, and it's not trivial. It's no laughing matter, game design. In professional spaces, there are dedicated people who have the dedicated skill of game design. They're trained for it. This is not something you can face roll on the 11th hour after you've built the system. This needs to be an ongoing process. And well, if you have multiple people in your team, then sure, you can have an elitist coder and a game designer, and everything can work harmoniously. Hopefully, maybe not. But if you're by yourself, then you've got a lot against you. So you have to do the best with your time to get stuff out, basically. Because in the end, if you can sell something and you can finance your next game or your game dev life, that would be awesome. Just making games and funding the next ones and supporting your family and supporting yourself. That's a pretty awesome dream to chase. That's a pretty good ideal.
That's a nice dream. 100%. That's great. So a question that I got on YouTube, and I mean, I do have an opinion. I just want to see what you'd think about this. Is do you think that people should start with 2D games, 3D games, or does it even really matter?
Right. Yeah, because you did ask me about 2D and 3D. I think it largely depends on your preference. I mean, in terms of Unity, the similarities between 2D and 3D, it's a difference between checking for a collision versus a collision 2D or something like that. And the other major thing is perhaps rotations. The rotation systems are probably what I found personally a bit different between 2D and 3D. But for the most part, 3D is pretty damn accessible if you don't bite off more than you can chew. And that is to say, don't start stuffing in AAA grade models from the asset store and trying to tie them into, work with simple shapes first. Like this game I told you I was making recently. I'll probably make a video about it soon, but it was just a cube. The game is your player is a cube. That's it. But I tried to focus on the game mechanic and the fun factor and the game design, less so than the visuals, because people get caught up in the visuals a lot, and you can really slow things down. And better looking, if something looks better, it's not necessarily the better for you or better for the game. Because you're creating a standard that perhaps you can't meet long term across the whole project. Like if you stuff in some high poly count model that looks like it's from Last of Us or something into your project, well, what about the rest of the stuff? What about all the right, now everything has to match up, right? Because art inconsistency is one of the biggest things you see, one of the biggest hallmarks of, I guess, if you're trying to avoid making a game that looks amateur, be mindful of consistency between art. And, that's pixel art as well, pixel size consistency, people grabbing a character from this free site, a background from that free site, and then, enemies from that free site, and kind of mixing them all together, and you get this kind of mishmash. But often when you begin, you don't see that. And this is, again, something that I went through with one of my earlier game releases on Flash. And it wasn't until I got feedback from someone that they told me that, hey, like your scales are all out, the art looks like it's been cobbled together. And I never forget that. It really stuck with me. So a quick story: I made like a car game back in the Flash days. It was fairly successful, and it had before the analytics tools that I was using dropped out. I think it has 6 million players at one point. It was like a game called Clutchburn or something.
What website was that on?
Because I'm trying to... It was just a Flash site. Sorry, it was a Flash game, and it was distributed around all Newgrounds and all these different sites would have had it. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't mean I got paid that much, because it didn't work like that back in the day. Yeah, but it was, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I put in all these like analytics to know exactly. I put too many metrics in, like to find out exactly where they crash and everything, so I could plot it against the map. I was like, okay, this is really irrelevant. But anyway, when I released it, I think it was on Newgrounds. Someone said, well, like, your art style is kind of mishmashed, and they were right, because it was mishmashed, because I was just beginning, and I was grabbing rendering out cars in Blender, and then grabbing poser models, which is like a different program, and just mixing it together and using kind of free textures from some site. But it stuck with me. I think it was one of those moments where, hey, art consistency, scales, I should remember this. And I never forgot it. It was that one comment that that person made, and I thought, this guy's right, or this girl, or whoever, they were right. And so now when I make games, I always try to be, I try to pay attention to the scaling and art consistency. But it's very hard, because we get so close to the projects that we don't really even see the flaws anymore. It's you need to ask someone like, hey, here's a screenshot, point out all the problems, and preferably a designer. Say, tell me to be ruthless. Don't sugarcoat it. And that's why asking friends sometimes, it's not the best people to ask, because friends will typically tell you what you want to hear, because they want to value the friendship. They don't want to disappoint you.
They want to be your friend still. They don't want you to cut them off.
Right.
Screw you. This game's great. Now that
They're like, it looks okay.
So, but sometimes you need people to just be honest and kind of brutal or whatever, but constructive as well. There's feedback comes in various forms, and not all should be necessarily acknowledged, because some people will intentionally ruin your game. It's like, just because someone said it doesn't mean it's good advice. Don't listen to everything. Every feedback is, because people are wrong sometimes.
Definitely.
Wow.
Do you have like a method of going? Do you use the asset store for assets, or do you create your own assets usually?
I've not used the asset store for assets yet, but I see the value, and in the future, if I was making, but that's mainly because of the type of game I'm making. It's not so most of the stuff on the asset store these days, it's more like 3D models, and I mean, there could be 2D stuff, but I think there is a skill. Yeah, no, go on. I think there is a skill in being able to adapt some paid art like that in your own way. That I don't know what the game's called now, or the guy, but there's that YouTuber who had a successful game launch with that Fox or something.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember his name,
Right.
But I know what you're
Last
talking
Tree,
about.
is that the game?
Yeah, but he made a whole video about how all the art in his game was
Asset store.
basically from the asset store, and how on Reddit people were calling it out, saying, this is an asset. But again, these are developers, and gamers probably won't recognize the art. But I guess the trick or how it should be approached is you need to adapt it to your own style. If you're going to use the asset store, people shouldn't just take full, you see these games released on Steam that they didn't even take out the copyright from the asset developer or something. So but that's a different thing. That's a straight up.
I mean, exactly.
Bad actors.
It's the lack of creativity. They just want to get something out there and try to hustle it out. It seems like and maybe not. Maybe they really have real passion with it. They're like, I found the best game mechanic, and I just need some kind of skin to put into it. But I don't think a lot of times it's that. I think a lot of times it's they download it and they just get a whole city they use the default scene and they put in a guy in there and that's the whole thing right there. They got it going.
Right, and in some cases it's not even a game.
Yeah, exactly. It's like walk around the city. Yeah,
exactly. It's like the demo scene that came with the tutorial pack. Oh, sorry, with the with asset pack.
Exactly, that's it. And that's fine for a prototype, but when it comes to releasing on Steam Store, I think there's got to be a little bit. I mean, I don't know if you want to waste $100 on that. I wouldn't want to wait like whatever, however much it is to put something on the Steam Store. But the hardest part when I use the asset store, that's why I avoid it, is literally exactly what you're talking about, finding assets that work together. One bit of advice that I got from Jason Wyman on like one of these other podcasts was, if you find an asset that you like, then you contact the artist and you have him basically do commissioned work, and therefore that way you keep the same style. And I think that's, if you have deep pockets or something. I mean, I would say like it's definitely one way to go for sure.
That's a good idea for sure. But yeah, absolutely, I agree absolutely, and that's kind of how I think I'll approach games in the future. I think in the future I'll just allocate probably money to just pay a dedicated artist in the future, because I realize the time that I've lost myself trying to manage the art, hundreds and hundreds of hours. So in terms of my cost per hour or whatever, it would have just worked out cheaper if I paid someone. But here's the thing: not everyone is able to have that initial outlay, especially if you're younger or people are getting into it. I definitely couldn't afford to do that when I was starting with my Flash games. I had to cobble things together and clone stamp out watermarks or whatever just to get through the door. But now I'm an adult. I've got a job. I can probably afford to spend a bit, and I think there's it's very actually useful. Well, but just to make a point about that, I think that some developers they feel they have this feeling that they need to do everything themselves for it to stay authentically their project or something like that. And I know, because I used to have this feeling as well. Well, like, no, I'll do everything myself just to say I did everything myself. But it's a bit redundant to be thinking like that. And it's not until you make that first decision to say, hey, outsource to Fiverr or someone to get someone to replace your player controller, for instance. One of the core art pieces in the game, And if I can give any advice to people, is get someone professionally or capable, if you aren't, to do your player controller if you're doing, your player graphics or animations, because it really changes the whole look of the game,
Yeah, I didn't even think, like, right now I'm in that. Well, it's not because I don't think anyone could do it better than me, and not because I'm from like some kind of a howdy toddy, like I can do art. I can't do art very well. I'm not very good at it. But the reason I've been using my own art is literally because I've run into like the asset problem, and I find it hard to, like, especially with the family, and I think a lot of people are coming out here from the same way. Hard to use anything other than like either really cheap assets or free assets in my games. So I end up having to like just scrounge together some art that I make. At least it's in the same style because I'm making it. But at the same time, it's just like it is redundant. It's a waste. Not a waste of time, but it's definitely a time eater. It eats away at the time you could be making the actual game. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's hard to, because good art is not cheap. Good art getting done professionally, and nor should it be, because everyone should be paid accurately for their time, and artists in the community, we share game devs. We share this space with artists who focus on art. There's a lot of artists out there who are involved in this scene, who don't program, who don't really make their own games, but they're here to support the developers to make games, and that's how they make their living. So I think it's important to also kind of support those people who are putting themselves out there and being realistic and charging good, affordable rates. I think it's worth considering because it supports everyone and keeps it all kind of moving together. But it's so, if you're working on a new game and you got an art bill, let's say you calculated it up, you ask someone to do it, and they came back with, well, that's going to be $2,000 or something like that. which is pretty modest in terms of what art could cost.
Definitely, some assets can be like $500 for like a good asset, just on one single asset. So depending on what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's and that can be hard. That can be hard for people to say, well, that how am I going to? So in those cases, you have to work with what you have, and you definitely don't. Yeah, I mean, it's when you're starting out, you typically don't want to be paying for art at all. And I made a video some time ago about this topic because I understood the dilemma that a lot of newcomers were having, where they'd get caught up trying to do their own art, but it was completely bottlenecking the project because they're not artists. They don't really want to be artists. They're not really looking to learn that trait. It's more just they're trying to make it work just so they can move on with the project, but they haven't considered getting someone else to do it or whatever. But those people they get stuck at this bottleneck, and they get really demoralized because doing something that you're not good at and you're not making progress on is a surefire way to make you just kind of want to quit something. But it's a problem because you're then sometimes quitting game development, where really you love the development, but you're getting stuck on the art, where really what you should be doing is quitting the art. But quite often they'll bundle the whole game making process into that situation where they just dismiss it all as like, this is all too hard, I can't make games. No, you can make games. You just picked the wrong art style. And I made a video, I think it was called 5 Art Styles for Shit Artists was the title. And I walked through all like 5 different styles that people can consider using, primitives, rotoscoping, primitive shapes, even, ASCII art. You don't have to, games like V, whatever it was, that platformer, smash hit, probably millions of copies sold. That guy probably never has to work again, or that team or whoever it was. But the art was very, very simple. It was just a platformer and had this little character. And I don't think the character even has a walk cycle. It just kind of glides through the level. But the design was very good. It was a platformer, very good attention to detail in terms of the design and the placement of objects and the flow. And this is where they put all their resources to make the experience compelling. And at that point, your art style is rather irrelevant. You can make a hit game with using a black fill background and a white square as your player. And if the gameplay is compelling enough, then you can find success with that. Unlimited budget. Jeez. I don't think I've ever thought of that scale
No.
before. No, because it's I've always kept my scope within kind of a particular sphere. I've always liked these space adventures. There's these retro space adventures. I guess they're 4X, but you may or may not know this game called like Starflight. It was an old school. I think it was a DOS game, but then it was released on the Sega Genesis. I had it on the Sega Genesis, and you would fly to different planets and you kind of mine them, and there was some underlying story, and you'd have to harvest different planets for resources. And this is the kind of game I've always kind of wanted to put a modern spin on, and others have, but there was a simplicity to this one that made it very palatable, let's say, where I've tried a lot of other kind of 4X space style games, but there's just too much to it. Too many stats, just too much. I can't get through the first, intro through the tutorial phase. It's just so I don't know. I don't know, to answer your question.
No, that's the answer. That's the answer. That's a good answer too. That's really cool because, like, it doesn't necessarily have, like, you have an unlimited budget doesn't mean you have to spend it all, dude. You get to pocket some money. I mean, that could be like a really high budget game as well. It's really interesting concept that I haven't really considered. Is it like would you kind of compare it to like Eve or like a simpler version of Eve online?
Yeah, much simpler. Much simpler, I suppose. Yeah, Eevee's crazy. I once tried to play that game. I was just like, God damn it, this game is complicated. I like the idea of it. I like the idea of that complexity, but the hands-on is a different thing. And I think it's just the time.
Yeah, it's a lot of time invested on it. And then I mean, I've never played it, but from what I understand is literally all that time can just be blown up in an instant or robbed from you like a pirate. Like it's too real at that point. It's like it's not a game anymore. This is life. This is your second life. This is it.
Right. Well, and that's a bit of a thing as well. You know, that people often end up focusing on the games more than life itself. You know, I was caught up playing MMOs for a good part of my earlier years, and it nearly destroyed my life. You know, like I was out of control, where all I could think about was this MMO and what I'd buy next and what I'd do, and I had friends there and everything, and I started becoming even antisocial in my real life just because I wanted to go home and play this MMO. And then, you know, it's like, wow, man. And the day I cut that tether is the day I started making progress with my game dev career. That was the one thing holding me back.
No, and I've had issues with that. I think that's like kind of in the MMO like nature, and maybe modern. Like I think it started with like everyone knows World of Warcraft is like the WoW addiction is like the thing. WoW addiction is what really I feel like that's the first MMO addiction I've heard of, and it's not just WoW anymore, but that's really I feel like the one that's destroyed. I'm not shaming WoW. I feel like WoW is a great game. It's good for them, but like it really has some addictive properties to it that just makes you.
Absolutely, yeah. The game I was playing was a WoW clone. It was like a Korean WoW clone, and there was a plethora of them at the time, and still are. It was called Perfect World International. So it's very ironic because the perfect you get a perfect world there, which is real life is deteriorating.
You don't need your normal life. No, I played Aeon Online, which is kind of like a Korean WoW clone as well. That was
yeah, I know Aeon. Yeah.
That one was fun too. I think MMOs are so fun. They're so dangerously fun. I feel like because it's such an investment. You just start wasting your entire life on it. You could be doing something productive, and literally you're grinding with all that effort. You literally could make your own MMO by the end of that. It's insane.
Oh, that's very true. And I think that's a big part when you realize how much time you could have invested into learning something or making games, and how many games you could have launched. You know, the time sink and what that represents. You know, people should look at their whatever game they play the most on Steam, look at those hours and consider what that might represent, how many games they could have created and shipped in that time. You know, but not to hate on. You know, I'm obviously a massive grew up as a gamer and have been gaming for most of my life, and only in the more recent years I've kind of replaced that interest with making games. You know, it's filled that same. That whatever that itch that gaming was having, I think game dev kind of somehow managed to fill that.
I agree with you 100%. I think, and it's not bad. Like we're not bashing games or anything like that. It's more like there's a healthy medium in playing games for 10 hours a day when you could play the same game for 3 hours a day, enjoy it just as much. I mean, I guess there's an itch. You get like a heroin. I feel like I was like a heroin addict at some points, but that might be being a teenager or something. I'm not sure. But at the same time,
it's probably an age thing as well. I think it's a lot to do with it. I think you have less responsibilities when you're younger. You know, there's nothing that will speed up your path out of an MMO than, you know, having kids and
yeah, exactly, having
family,
big responsibilities. People rely on you besides just yourself.
Yeah, you got a real RPG going on. High stakes.
Still want to get away sometimes. No, I'm just kidding. All right. So, what's your best advice to like people just starting out? What do you think? What would you consider your best advice? Never give up. No, something else besides that.
There's a lot of different things that are, I guess, relevant, but I guess get accustomed to the process of learning and master the process of learning, and realize that you can have confidence, realizing that you can pretty much learn everything or anything that you want, and don't look at things and say, oh, look, that's too hard, I can't do that, or that system's too complicated, I can't try that, or whatever. I understand that you can, but what stands between you and that outcome is simply a dedicated, concentrated effort to learn it, and realize that if somebody makes some cool, crazy pixel art or whatever, or some great music track, that you're made of the same skin and bones as that person. And sure, maybe they have some creative inclination that you might feel like you don't, but more often than not, you'll find that any person who has any level of mastery over a particular craft, if you went back and saw their first things, it's probably very consistent with where you are now, so yeah. And I guess in that sense, don't compare yourself too much with others, and kind of focus on your own journey, focus on your next steps, because there's perhaps the biggest thing that will demoralize you and set you back is making too close comparison with where you are and where someone else is. And you kind of, it's like, I recently took a trip up to the mountains. Well, I like to go once a year, just to kind of clear my head and put myself through some intentional hardship, let's say. Just I find it makes me a better game developer and whatever else. But when I was looking up at this mountain, I nearly threw up every time. And I realized I got to stop looking up to where I need to go, because I was carrying a very heavy backpack and I was up there for almost a week. But I came to realize that I need to just look at the next few meters and then go, okay, I'm here. Okay, I'm here. Now I get to this next point. Okay, I'm here. Now look a bit further. Okay, I'm here. And I got to the top, no problem. But every time I looked up where I needed to go, I just felt sick. But it was that reminder that looking at too much of a contrast between where you are and where something is not effective. It's not useful. It has to be just far enough where it's aspirational and kind of attainable, and then you kind of move on to the next, and then the next, and the next. But then if you try to skip ahead, as you go, I can't do that, I give up, I quit, and I won't even try. Right. Basically.
Yeah, like comparing yourself to someone who's, you don't, first of all, like people, especially on YouTube, I feel like this is a big issue. It's like people starting out, they go and watch people on YouTube and they go create a game, and you don't know how long this guy's been coding. He could be, just because he's on YouTube now and he's only had YouTube videos for 2 years, he might have been coding for 10 years. So just because it seems like he can do this so easily, and you have you shouldn't be comparing yourself to the guy who's teaching you how to code. You should be kind of looking at yourself. How were you yesterday? How can I get better today? And that's kind of, I agree 100%. Like literally just focus on the now, and maybe like have a 50-meter goal. I guess that's what I would call it. I was from the Army, but like literally just like a really close goal, short-term goal, short-term goal, short-term goal. And it'll all eventually wait a year or two. Now you're at a long-term goal. If you look back, you've achieved that long-term goal.
For sure. And I guess one of my other bits of advice would be like, write down your notes. Don't just rely on keeping it all in your head. Like I've got, little shitty game ideas and like little whatever. But I went, better not show that one. But but the point is, quite often you'll go back through your notes or little books, and I've got them all around me. I've got this piles of notebooks that from over the years that I've forgotten about, and every now and then I'll find one periodically, and I'll look through it, and I'll go, oh wow, that idea I had 2 years ago suddenly makes sense now, or now I know what to do with it, or now I've got the skills to actually act on it. Where back then it was I had the idea, I had the concept, but I didn't have the technical skills. They didn't align, so it just got shelved. But so I think just keep a record of all these things. It's very useful.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for coming, dude. It was an awesome conversation we had. I feel like I've learned a lot. It was a very interesting conversation. Thank you for coming. And check out Blood and Mead on Steam. Give it a wish list. Just give them some support. And check out Lost Relic Games on YouTube. And anything else you would like to say, dude?
No, just well done to you as well for starting this new journey with this YouTube channel. And I'll give you some advice and just say stick with it, because I think you're you're using a good approach. There's an authenticity that I appreciate, and I think others will as well. So just keep plugging on. And for my own channel, for example, it took me like a good year before I started seeing any kind of exponential growth. So there is this almost a bit of a test. It's like, how much do you want it? You know, how many videos are you prepared to make? And there's times where it's like, well, this is just not going anywhere. But then you never know where that next thing is around the corner, that, you know, where something just goes, and, you know, so keep at it, man, because I think you're onto a good thing.
Yeah, I think the hardest part is, well, I mean, so for this channel specifically, like I've had a couple YouTube channels in the past that went nowhere, but for this one specifically, I feel like the passion behind, like I have fun making the videos, and I have fun like talking to game devs and understanding where they're coming from and learning from them. So I think the difference between this and past YouTube channels, and what advice I guess what I would offer is just literally have fun doing what you're doing, and whether it's successful or not, I'm sure if you put enough work into YouTube and you keep refining and do the hard work, everything will blow up. And even for anyone watching as well, if you just need the passion and the work, and if you want a YouTube channel, you can literally do the same thing. Just work at it.
And that work ethic is very important. You got to work for it. It's not gonna passion is one element. You know, you got to have passion, but you got to grind it. You got to be prepared to put in the work. Because,
Definitely,
it's not gonna build itself.